Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Roots of the Valley. I'm your host, John Franklin, and today we are going to dig into one of the stories that is really important to the Yakima Valley. I'm here with Konner Hopkins, who is the Executive Director of the Greenway. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Konner.
Yep. Thanks for coming. This is fun.
Yeah, well, you told me that there's really a deep and complex history to how the Greenway originally got started over 40 years ago. Can you, where do you even start with that?
Yeah, it's a complex kind of beginning history. We can trace parks back to the river to the early 1900s in Sumac Park. Following a 1933 flood that destroyed Sumac Park, it was replaced with essentially city landfills. And so you saw a collection of city landfills along the Yakima River, and it's accounted about 9 tries between 1950s and the 1970s to start some form of riverfront parks, freeway parks after the freeway was built by the Department of Transportation. But eventually, in the late 1970s, thanks to a Washington State River Conservation Bill for the gap-to-gap reach, which is the Seal to Union Gap, like things really started turning for Yakima River Greenway.
So these groups that unsuccessfully tried to get a trail on the river, were they all the same people, or was it sort of a bunch of different groups that tried something separately and it didn't work?
It was a collection of Yakima City Councils, Yakima County Commissioners, Washington State Park Commissions, and they all looked at this section of river, and the original idea wasn't even a pathway. The original idea was preserving this natural area. And so it wasn't until the Army Corps of Engineers came in and built the levee that we see running today, because for much of the early 1900s, there wasn't a levee separating the river from town. And it wasn't until we saw that levee that the idea of an extended pathway could even be built. The focus was on preserving the riparian woods, the Yakima River, access to boating, canoeing, fishing, picnicking. And so those early efforts were focused on the Yakima River, and then I think opportunities led us to build really great pathways connecting the community all the way from Union Gap to Natchez.
You sort of told me a little bit earlier that this was created due to something happening, and it sounded like you said in the legislature. Was this sort of a state law that changed that gave the funds for this?
So in late 1970s, 2 state representatives, Ed Seeberger and Jim Whiteside, was able to get a bill passed with the state of Washington legislature. That's the Yakima River State Conservation Bill. And thanks to that bill, $35,000 came from the State Parks Commission to commission a study. And that is what we call our Yakima River Regional Master Plan. That was the very first full-scale study that was completed on this corridor to develop parks, public access, boating facilities. And so that was that plan that we see here. That was that original $35,000 from the State Parks Commission. But really what they found is they created a plan, and they came back, and the county didn't have the money to build it. The city didn't have the money to build it, which is why in 1980, a private foundation, the Yakima Greenway Foundation, was created to take that fundraising to the community and say, you know, we've got the ability to do something really special. And while there were some state grants, the community built this through private fundraising and family foundations.
So this is really sort of the community's greenway. It's not like the states, it's not the cities, but it's the people's.
Yeah, so the responsibility came back to the county. The county handed that off to the private organization, the Yakima Greenway Foundation, and through incredible community support. I mean, this was mainly private dollars that built this entire system.
And how many of those dollars were needed to originally create this greenway?
Well, I believe the original fund drive through the board was a fund drive for $450,000. And so that was an enormous amount of money back in the 80s. But we've had dozens of fund drives since. Our first park, Sarge Hubbard Park, was in the early 1980s, and our last major expansion was in 2016 for the Natchez Pathway. So, there have been dozens of community fund drives. Millions of dollars from the community has poured in to build this place that we call the Greenway.
So the Greenway, it's been up for 40 years. What exactly does the Greenway mean to the people of Yakima and to the people who are just coming over to walk it?
Yeah, so I think that the meaning has evolved over the years. I think early on, the Greenway was where you took your family on the weekends. It's where you rode your bike. It's where you got into the river and you canoed or you fished. It really was this all-encompassing recreational facility. We weren't in a spot where people were traveling as far for recreation and they were looking more internally at their community. And I certainly think now it's more like that after-work recreation. We're walking with our families, we picnic. You're coming out to one of our events. We've got Yakima is growing and we're losing open space. And you see the challenges with city or county park facilities. They're not expanding, they're only retracting. And so what the Greenway means to the community is quality of life. It means open space for their families. For visitors, it means preserving a piece of the Yakima River for them to come to Yakima and enjoy. It's a recruitment tool to show that Yakima cares about quality of life, and we care about open space and we care about green space. We care about this natural area that runs through our urban community. People never believe it until we get out, but the deer, the bald eagles, the pelicans, the beavers that are just steps off the path through this incredibly urban area, it's incredibly important for our community to be able to have access and interact with that.
You did mention a couple of events, and they are very important. I know a couple of weeks ago we had the Gap to Gap.
Yep.
Back in November on a cold morning, I ran a turkey trot.
Yep.
When did the Greenway start hosting these community events?
So the Gap to Gap was our first large-scale event. And back in the early 1980s, the volunteers, the board of directors, the commissioners loved this space so much, they wanted to figure out a way to show it off. And so in their brain, what better way to show it off than a race consisting of running. They ran the dikes and the levees, they kayaked and canoed the river, they mountain biked the hills, and then they road biked through the valley. And so that was like definitely a showcase event. And so that was our first one. And 20 years ago, we used to host bed races down Yakima Avenue, where people would weld cast iron wheels to the bottom of bed frames and race people down Yakima Avenue. The foundation has hosted duck races where you'd buy a duck and you'd put your name on it, and they would drop rubber ducks in the river on the first one to make it from Harlan Landing to Century Landing. We've had Earth Day festivals. We brought that back a few years ago. We've had turkey trots. The list of events and kind of community engagement. Most people remember us for Case of the Blues or Rock the Gap, which were really great music festivals here at Sarge Hubbard Park. Our ability to bring the community in is kind of endless, and our opportunities there are endless on what we can host across 8 parks and 20 miles of pathway. So we've been really lucky to have great events over the years.
Do you happen to have any favorite event that's along the Greenway?
Well, the Gap to Gap was my introduction to, I raced my first Gap to Gap in 2012 before I was really even familiar with what this organization did. And so, the Gap to Gap was my introduction to the Greenway, and it's definitely kind of holds a special place in my heart for the Greenway in this area.
So you did mention that you originally had contact with the Greenway as a community member, and then you became a part of the board, and now you're the executive director. I guess, what differences are you seeing about the Greenway now that you're more involved than you were when you were just an average citizen walking up and down the river?
I think when you live it day to day, you gain an understanding for all the complexities of managing a private park system, and I think you gain an appreciation for how slow change can be, but that it can still be positive. I think as a community member or someone that just interacts with our events, you see things and you'd like them to improve, you'd like them to change, you'd like more opportunities, and then you get behind the desk and there's so many people at play here. There's so many organizations and agencies at play here that change takes time, and I think understanding our history, I've seen that. We've got, almost coming up on a 50-year history here. And so, I'm 1 year into the job, and I think I've got gaining a pretty good understanding that, we just completed a 2025 master plan, and that master plan is visioning for the next 20 years. And I like to think that, with patience, we can work towards some really, really fantastic things in the next decade.
Speaking of the master plan, what are you hoping for in the future?
So I think the one big focus, and not one, but the one big focus that is a priority is getting back to our roots, and that's the Yakima River, and now the Natchez, seeing that we have that extension. But getting to the community to engage with why we were here in the first place. Without the Yakima River, the Yakima Greenway wouldn't exist. And so we went out and we were really great park and pathway builders. And so a focus is going to be on restoring the conditions of the infrastructure we already have, and then kind of getting people to interact with the river, the natural area, why it's important to conserve, why we need to be preserving these areas. And so the master plan is a roadmap to rebuilding our infrastructure, rebuilding these pathways, getting these parks into the spot where we can host those major community events again, getting the community to interact on a nightly basis, on a weekly basis, and then making sure that the Greenway is a part of kind of their summer plans, that, I bring the family out for work parties, or I bring the family out for film festivals or music festivals. And so it's like just really bringing life into what's been built here for the last 40 years, and then focusing on the river and why that's so important to our community.
You told me that you've been in your role of executive director for a little over a year now. Mm-hmm. What are you hoping to have your mark on the Yakima Greenway be?
That's, I want to sustain the success that we've seen for 50 years. I think we've been chasing it for 50 years, but financial sustainability. We operate this with no tax dollars. There's no tax funding from residents of the county or city that contribute to any piece of this maintenance or operations. And so, I think if I could be successful, it would be to leave behind a greenway that could be here for another 100 years without the threat of, funding crisis. It's incredibly challenging. You see that in our city, in our county parks and rec, that funding these projects is hard, and we're funding it from a private perspective. But I really think this is a place that our community needs. Our community needs it moving forward. I think young people need more access to the outdoors, not less. I think young people need more access to parks and events and programs that teach them to boat, that teach them to ride bikes, that teach them about the river and animals. And so it's like that sustainability piece, that if I can be at least someone that moves that solution forward, that this space can be here for Yakima for generations moving on. I think that would be, all the success I could ask for.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Konner, for speaking with me today.
Thanks.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Roots of the Valley. Be sure to watch all of our other episodes. They will be coming out every first and third Sunday of the month on our YouTube channel. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.